much, Shashank, and congratulations on your Wharton admit. What I would like to, a little bit about is to begin with, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, what do you do, and we'll take it from there.
Got it. So I think I'm just before starting a lot of the ma'am, success or at least the admit ma'am I owe to you guys. But maybe I'll start with my background in a more chronological order. Ma'am grew up in different cities. My father was an army officer, mother was a teacher. So spent a lot of time in different cities across India. Finally came to Delhi to do my undergraduation. Did my undergraduation in engineering, focusing on manufacturing and automation from NSIT, which is Netaji Subhash Institute of Technology, which is part of the University of Delhi. So was fairly active during college, both in extracurriculars and academics. Post college, I've had a bunch of jobs, but largely across the startup and venture capital ecosystem. My last 4 years have been in venture capital, spread across two firms. One is an Indian venture capital fund called Orias Venture Partners, and one is a Chinese conglomerate called Fosun International, where I currently work. I also, before these 4 year stints, I also had a 1 year stint at Ernst and Young in the consulting division.
Okay.
So roughly, ma'am, before I joined my MBA, I would have about 6 years of work experience. I planned to go about after 5 years, but because of the pandemic, it got delayed by a year.
Right.
So I think, yeah. So that's broadly my background. Outside of work, ma'am, have also been actively quizzing, been part of basketball teams, and so on and so forth. So do a few things outside. One thing I'm very proud of is that I edit Wikipedia quite regularly.
Wow.
That's, I think, something that I feel close to.
All right. So how, at so early in your career, how do you get into a venture capital firm? Because that is something that, a lot of these aspirants have in their mind, right? They think that, getting into a, VC firm kind of a thing is always after an MBA kind of a goal. So how did that happen to you?
Got it, ma'am. So essentially, if I look at venture capital funds, there are two kinds of roles at VC funds. One is a pre-MBA, analyst associate sort of role, and one is a typical post-MBA associate role, which the post-MBA roles are partner tracks, which means that post-MBA roles typically end up, if you do well, you can become the partner at the fund and be part of the shareholding in that sense, even though these are not public companies. The pre-MBA roles are typically 2 year roles where you're expected to come after a couple of years of experience or maybe more, and then spend time, learn about things, and then move forward to your MBA. In a few cases, people are also promoted to post MBA roles, which was the case for me at my current fund.
Okay.
But broadly, ma'am, if the typical how it works is that after college, you either work at a consulting firm, which is the most common route for a year or two or maybe three, or you end up working at a tech company in a tech company or a startup in a product or any specialized role. And post that, a lot of venture capital funds hire in pre-MBA roles, which is where I also got an opportunity to work at an Indian fund called Orias.
Got it. So, well, when did this whole thought of doing an MBA come to your mind? And, what was the trigger for you?
Ma'am, so I think, after college, when we, whenever, so I'll be a little bit candid here. MBA was more of a, after elimination master's degree, that there were so many so there are specialized degrees like masters in engineering, masters in sciences, where you know what you're going to do, which was the case for a lot of my friends who went for their masters right after college. Then of course we have the entire UPSC civil services track. For most generalists and people who really want to do masters, MBA becomes a bit of a option where you can explore and still be somewhere in the industries that you're looking at. And since it's a broader degree, your options are also open. So it was always on the I'd always planned to do it, largely out of elimination. Took the CAT a couple of times.
Okay.
While I scored well in my CAT exam, scored 99 plus actually 3 times. But unfortunately couldn't get those IIM ABC calls because of my background in general. So naturally, I think I was gravitating towards either an ISB or foreign schools.
All right, all right. So, how did it all start? So how did you, start with your GMAT journey? Because that's the, biggest challenge for most people when they, get started with their whole MBA or MBA plan. And more importantly, along with work, how did you manage your prep?
Yeah, ma'am. So I think one thing is that from day zero of my GMAT preparation, I have been with the Arun sir.
Okay.
As a background, ma'am, I had taken CAT a couple of times, and at score, I think my best score at that point of time was 99.3 or something. So I was fairly confident that I would score well in my GMAT. I took a couple of mocks and did not score very well on the mocks. Scored pretty poorly. So the overconfidence didn't really, pan out. So then I thought I might need some help, and one of my friends recommended the Crackverbal session that was happening in Gurgaon. So this was, I think, 2018, ma'am. I think 2018.
18,
So yeah, 2018, and I was at Orias back then. So I decided to attend the session, and I understood that there were a few fundamental things that I was doing incorrectly. I was focusing on because while CAT and GMAT are similar in terms of how they are structured, the level of difficulty for the quant and verbal sections are actually inverse. Like the verbal section is very, very different when it comes to GMAT, and the quant section is relatively easier. And for verbal section, you need to focus on a lot of rules and fundamentals, which is not the case when it comes to CAT. So I understood those problems when I attended the first session with Arun sir. And actually, that's the only preparation that I had done. After that, I spent about 4 to 5 weeks preparing on my own, work based on the fundamentals that were given back then. It was a bit of a challenge to work alongside, alongside office. But one thing that kept me going was that I have multiple attempts. That I have multiple attempts. There's no single attempt. Even if I fail, I can just give it 3-4 times, which is very different from the CAT exam, because if you fail once, you have to wait another entire year to take it again. So there was no problem, and I went with a very cool mindset. And I was very sure that I was going to give it again. But fortunately, I got a good score in the first attempt, so did not have to give it a second time.
Awesome.
I think the whole fallback option of taking it again, having multiple options, rescheduling, all of that flexibility really worked well when it came to like a psychological mindset.
Right. That's true. I think, it's a relief that you always know that there is a backup plan or there is an option again to redo this. And you don't need to wait too long also. It's just 16 days and you always have an option to do that. So that's true. So you managed a 760 on your GMAT. So in your preparation, was verbal always your pain point? Since you mentioned CAT, you already a 99 percentiler on CAT. So quant was never a problem for you.
Yeah, ma'am. So actually, when it came to CAT, quant was a problem for me simply because my speed wasn't up to the mark.
Okay.
But when it came to GMAT, I always scored that 50 score. So I could never score 51, to be honest, which was what most engineers end up scoring. But I'm confident that I'd be okay with a 50 score also. So in almost all my mocks, I got a standard 50 score. GMAT was relatively easier when it came to speed, the expectation there. So quant then did not become a problem, but I still practiced quite a bit. I practiced in the hope of scoring a 51, which actually never came to fruition. But I used to practice a lot of sectional tests, individual topics, and also try the tougher questions, 700 to 800 question banks. So I did practice quite a bit in the hopes of scoring slightly higher. But clearly, ma'am, verbal was the only problem. Verbal, of course, has three sections: critical reasoning, reading comprehension, and sentence correction. So for me, critical reasoning was after doing power. So Arun sir had recommended couple of books. So PowerScore Bible was one. So after doing PowerScore Bible, I had a very high accuracy when it came to critical reasoning because it was very mathematical in its approach. Which left us with RC and sentence correction. RC for me was just about practice. Some days you scored well, some days you didn't score well, but it's a bit of a challenge to know how to clearly improve RC. So it's just practice there. So I kept doing practice and focusing on the inputs rather than the output. The only section where I had put and I think the section where I was struggling the most and put in the most effort was sentence correction. So it's a bit tricky because what you have learned throughout your life, and the going by the ear that this sounds correct, this sounds incorrect. That's the approach that I was told not to go for. So it was a lot of unlearning, specifically when it came to rules and then assimilating those rules clearly. But sentence correction was the one where maximum increase happened. So I went from a typical 50-38 score to a 50-42 score, and largely this delta was because of sentence correction.
Wow. Okay, awesome. So 2018 you took your GMAT, done and dusted with your GMAT, got a great 760 score. Then what was your plan? What went in your mind, and what did you want to do going from there?
Yeah, ma'am. So at that point of time, I was at Urias, which is an Indian fund. So I clearly had an idea that to apply to USB schools, I might need a little bit more of a I think big brand name, because I felt like that is something that foreign B schools appreciate because they identify with those, and they also think of it from a post MBA employability perspective. While I'd worked at EY, but it was only for a year, and it was not the last job. So there is always over indexation on the last job. The second thing I think I lacked at that point of time was international experience, because I'd worked like on a few projects outside India, but largely I felt like there could be a little bit more there. So these were the two things I felt I could improve upon. Parallelly, I had applied to the Indian School of Business, where actually my brother was graduating that year, and I got in at I gotten at ISB that year. And I had applied to a couple of venture capital funds, and I got into my current role there. So roughly in 2019, early Jan, I had the option of either going to ISB or staying back at the fund that I am currently working at, which is a Chinese fund, so got a lot of exposure. And I think the compensation was good enough for me to sort of think about foregoing ISB for a year and trying my hand at the current VC fund. So I decided to work here for maybe a year or two, and then simultaneously apply to foreign B schools as well as ISB again.
All right. So, now that you decided that, okay, you had one more year to think through your application process, so apart from obviously having a brand on your resume, were there some key points that you wanted to focus on in terms of building your profile, or, your focus was more around this new job and, making sure you have enough experience over there in terms of the kind of work you do so that it can be an added value to your application?
Yeah, no, I think a few things here. First, when it comes to creating an MBA application, a lot of it is, creating a vision for yourself and having that clarity on what you want to do, and also connecting your past dots to your future. So, for me, one of the key challenges was that I had I knew what I wanted to do in the future, but I had a lot of different kinds of roles. So I wanted to I also used the opportunity that I had my current role to consolidate on a few things that I had done across the last 3-4 years. And thankfully, my job gave me a lot of independence and freedom to do that. The second thing, I of course wanted to perform really well here, not just because I needed the letter of recommendations, but also it's a new job and slightly more responsibility in that sense. The first few months, of course, first 6 months or so, a lot of time was spent on just the job and ensuring that you do really really well here before you end up doing other things. Apart from that, I did a few things independently to build my profile as well. So while these were the first two things were more inherent and more internal in nature, I would not, I would be lying if I said that I did not do anything just for creating my profile. So some of those extrinsic things, just so that they would look good on my resume, I also ended up doing those things. And as a virtue of being at a slightly better venture capital fund, I got those opportunities as well. For example, some international organizations like UN, where I could be part of international um, um, programs on social enterprises, etc. So those kind of opportunities I got while I was at my new company. So I did these intrinsic and extrinsic things to one, be better at my job, create a better storyline around myself, and consolidate whatever I had done. And then also a few things which I felt could look good on my resume and I could also write about.
Right, right. So, Shashank, you applied mostly to all the Ivy League schools, right? Was that your goal always? You did mention that you did apply to Indian schools too. So, but more from the US perspective, I think most of the schools you applied to were all Ivy League schools. What was your thought around that?
Yeah, ma'am. So the idea was, actually I did not end up applying to ISB again, because I felt that the specifically during the pandemic, without the experience and without everything, it may not make sense to go to ISB right now, and I already had a significant amount of work um, so I did not end up applying to ISB again. I thought I might apply in the second round if things don't work out in the first round. Um, but from the US and European B schools, I had about 9 schools shortlisted, which were the top 7 schools in the US, the M7s and LBS and INSEAD in Europe. My rationale was, ma'am, very fairly straightforward. It's a lot of financial liability to go through, and the reality is that I wanted, at least in my mind, I did not want to use an MBA to change geographies. I wanted to come back to India, so the financial liability becomes even more pronounced when I need to come back to India, which means that at least if I'm going, if the only reason I'm going is for an education and for that exposure and branding, I might as well try to go to the better schools. So I plan to apply to 9 schools only. If I did not get in this year, then I would have reassessed my applications and then thought about it the next year. My initial plan was to apply to at least 6-7 schools in the first round. But when it actually came down to writing the applications, it became super exhausting. It was a mentally exhausting process. The amount of things that one has to create, write, rewrite. It's it. I think people underplay or do not understand how much effort that each application takes. So I could only apply to 4 schools in the first round instead of the 7-8 that I was expecting to apply.
Right.
And of course, those 4 schools were the top schools. So I ended up applying to Harvard, Booth, Wharton. So did not apply to Stanford, Columbia, etc. in the first round. I plan to apply to Columbia and INSEAD in the second round, where I had already started my applications, but thankfully did not have to go through with it.
Right. So, going through, you said, applying to these four schools, you yourself felt that, this whole process was a lot more than what you thought it was, right? So, what was that one biggest misconception that you had about this entire application process, especially when you're applying to these top schools? What you had in your mind, and when you actually went through it, what did you face?
So I think, ma'am, so the first and foremost thing is that in my mind, I felt like I already know what I was going to write about. I already knew, my, of course, work ex was fairly straightforward when it came to creating my resume. um, and I also had a bit of an idea of what my letter of recommenders I'd expect them to write.
Hmm.
But when it comes to putting all of this in on paper, and then for all the aspects, so I'll take a step back, and ma'am, I'll just, from my perspective, what were the things that one needs to create when it comes to an application.
Hmm.
So if I only take, say, one college, there would be a resume, um, a statement of purpose, which could be 1, 2, 3 questions,
Hmm.
so roughly 1,000 words that one needs to write there.
Hmm.
Then there is the letter of recommendation.
Hmm.
uh, then in some colleges there are also videos that one needs to put in.
Hmm.
uh, and then in addition to all of these, there is, there are certain additional questions that are there with your application.
True.
um, and I also applied to a couple of dual degrees, so
Hmm.
that added like another couple of dimensions to it, maybe another essay, so on and so forth.
Hmm.
So, um, and all of this has to come together to the singular story that you are talking about.
Hmm.
So for me, the story was that, I had worked in venture capital, and I had a strong interest in the mobility space. Mobility space, of course, going through a transformational shift.
Hmm.
I would want to, and in India, it's very nascent, whereas it's still developed in the US and some other geographies. So I would love to learn about that.
Hmm.
Get into more operational roles rather than the investing roles in mobility that I had done currently. So I'd invested in a few companies across India and China, Israel.
Hmm.
So I would want to learn more operationally and from a product perspective, and then come back and build it in India.
True.
So that was my a minute elevator pitch.
Hmm.
But to ensure that every aspect of my application is saying that, and creating a new dimension, and it is written, articulated in a way that is a powerful story, within that 500 word time word limit. All of that is a very tough thing, so it undergoes at least 5 to 10 revisions for each and every document that you need to submit.
True.
And on top of that, on your resume, there are small things that you need to take care of, which are formatting, grammatical errors, which also take like days. So it was just an overwhelming process when it comes to the number of things that one needs to prepare.
Hmm.
And when it comes to reviews and feedback, different people have different, it's a very subjective process. So there is a lot of noise that one would also see when it comes to feedback.
Hmm.
So how do you distill through that? How do you ensure that you are taking certain things? How do you take the final call?
Hmm.
uh, all of that becomes overwhelming. So for me, I felt like 4 to 6 colleges one can do in one round, but beyond that, it's not as straightforward. And you need to put in your 100% into every application that you give.
Right, right. So, you worked very closely with Arun on the entire process, right? So,
Yes.
what do you think is the role of a mentor, and why was it so important for you in this process? Or how was it so important for you in this process?
Yeah, ma'am. So I think one clear misconception when it comes to admissions is that consultants or mentors will end up um, end up giving you a lot of basically writing writing everything for you, and clarifying everything for you. But what I think Arun sir really helped me out is building that clarity of thought around what my goals really were, being honest about the basic core values, and then being able to articulate them clearly in all aspects of my application. So um, so I had, I think, multiple hour-long calls with Arun sir just to figure out certain things and my own background, which while I already had done these things, I still needed to understand why I did it and what was the purpose of it and how do I really showcase that. So just as an example, I was struggling with um, you know articulating my vision for the future. That um, one of the things was that I'll create a social enterprise. One of the things was so initially I had started out with the fact that I'll create a social enterprise and I'll work on that in India. But what I really understood was that it is not the social enterprise outcome, but more around how do I see certain things changing and why do I want to build out things, what are the problems that I want to solve, and building a social enterprise is an enabler to that problem statement and not the not my goal itself. My goal, so for example, my goal would be to solve a particular problem, let's say pollution or commute or something on those lines, and creating a social enterprise is an outcome which helps us in achieving that. So there were certain smaller things which I really learned throughout the process, and that is why I would also and I think Arun sir really helped me out in those aspects which were which I did not know that I had problems with. And that I think showed itself in the final outcome, specifically when it came to my statement of purpose across colleges.
Right.
And I'm actually very thankful for that. Outside of that, of course, this softer aspects around just how to write things and what were the issues with my resume, which for example, for my resume, I was focusing a lot on what I did versus the impact of my work. So all of those things changed over. It was a 180-degree difference when it came to my application in July versus my application in September.
Right.
So it really helped me out.
Right. So when you're applying to these top schools, right? So there is so much competition also, right? So what is the kind of research that you did to make sure that you really knew about the school, or especially did you talk to alums, or how did you go about that?
Yeah, ma'am. So I think multiple things before doing the research. I think one thing is to be clear about your own story and your own thought process, because what I've realized is that every school has hundreds of opportunities and hundreds of things that one can do. So once you have clarity, it might be easier for you, or at least a sense of direction, maybe not clarity but a sense of direction. It may be easier for one to get to more depth of your research and then put that on paper. But for me, once I had that initial story in mind and initial thought process clearly, I did a few things. I first did my own research online. Second, I reached out to alums, both directly and indirectly. Directly, of course, for almost all colleges, I had alums that I knew, through my network in the venture capital ecosystem. And I think indirectly, I reached out to cold emails on LinkedIn to at least, I think, at Wharton, at least I sent it to 30 odd, 40 odd people.
Wow.
But at others, I sent it to like 5 to 6 people in each college. And the reply rate is quite decent. I think, I'd expect at least over half of them to reply with a message, and about, 1/3 to really set up a call and talk to them. And then during the call, I had a mix of open-ended versus very specific questions. So the open-ended questions, just so that I could get new ideas which I hadn't thought of, and close-ended just to be specific around what I had already thought and how I wanted to, learn about those aspects. So first, online research. Second, speaking to alums. And third, I think no, I think these two were the main thing that I did.
All right.
Speaking to alums really helps out.
All right. So typically, how long did it take for the entire application process from, a post GMAT, from the research part to, finally submitting? What do you think is an ideal time people need to actually, look at?
Ma'am, so I think the earlier you start, the better it is. Ma'am, honestly, uh, whatever time you have, ma'am, people are able to do well within that. People, I guess, with the workload and all, time becomes a bit difficult to ration. But I would recommend getting done with the GMAT as soon as possible. So if you are planning to apply, say this year, uh, and you still haven't, a person still hasn't done their GMAT, I would recommend getting that out of the way over the next 1 to 2 months, because uh, you would need some time to first, talk to people about your story and then figure out whether it's right or not, and then uh, the research, reaching out to alums, that because you need to plan a little bit in advance, that might also take a month if you want to do it exhaustively. So the ideal time frame for me would be to get done with GMAT by, say, April or May. Of course, for me, it was already done 2 years in advance. But April or May is what I'd recommend. And then around June, by June, I would recommend having your story in place. And then spend July, August in creating that application, doing a research. If you follow this timeline, I think you would be more than, you'd be more than comfortable. But I know people who took their GMAT in August and yet in 15-20 days were able to write their applications.
Right.
There are people of all kinds. In fact, ma'am, I also did a slightly, I would say, not so wise thing, but I took the GRE again.
Okay.
I had a good GMAT score, but I thought if I have multiple different high scores in standardized tests, it might give me a slight bit of an edge. I don't think it really matters in hindsight. But I took the GRE in, I think, June end or July end. I think July 30th was my date. So July 30th was my date. So to be honest, my application was written in August and beginning of September itself. So you end up, ma'am, adapting to things, but ideally the earlier you start, the better it is. And also, if you end up starting in, say, April or around that time, there are certain other things that you can also apply to. For example, Stanford has a Reliance Dhirubhai Ambani scholarship program.
Yes.
So if you think that you have a very strong chance, or if financial liability might be a bit of a challenge, applying to that program in April end or May end, I think, would be a great idea. So the sooner you start, the better it is. Ideally, have 4 to 5 months for the entire process, but a couple of months are also good enough.
That's true. That's true. So, you mentioned you applied to around 4 schools in round one. How long did it take for that to translate into, say, an interview call?
Yeah, so the process is long. So if I really, now that we were on the timelines, if someone starts in, let's say, April and ends up giving the April, GMAT, then say June, July, August are July or August would be completely, in your application process. Then September is when you actually end up putting all applications. I would also recommend applying in round one, as compared to round two. Not because selection chances are very different. I believe the selection rate is very similar across the two rounds. However, round one, the application deadlines are staggered. So in round one, Harvard, for example, application was 8th September. Then the next two, which were Wharton and Stanford, were 15th. Then there was one on 23rd. Then there was one on 1st October. So it was basically spread out across September, which gave you like a week time for each application. Uh, Whereas it's not the case with round two. In round two, most deadlines happen in the first to second week of Jan. So you end, it is a very stressful time if all the applications are together. So I recommend applying in round one just for this reason. But honestly, it depends on whether you have all the other things in place.
Right.
So September and October beginning went entirely in writing the applications and putting them. Then in October, I think the first few weeks were just waiting for the results. October 3rd or 4th week, you end up getting your shortlist. I think from October 15th to October 30th, you end up getting your shortlist. Then November is entirely interviews. So if you have multiple college interviews, you end up giving multiple rounds. Wharton also has a group discussion, the TBD. And then December is entirely waiting for your results and getting selected or rejected. If you get rejected after your interviews, then you start the process all over again for round 2 in Jan, which goes on till March end.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So how many schools did you get an interview call from? I think you got from Booth and you got from Wharton both, right?
Yes, ma'am. So I got interview calls from Booth and Wharton, which were actually my preferred schools. I did not get it from Harvard, which of course is anyway was a long shot. In fact, because it was the first application, it was also not my best application. So the two schools that I was really expecting to get interviews from, I got interviews from both Booth and Wharton.
All right. So how was the interview process, and how did you go about preparing for it?
Yeah, ma'am. So every college has a very different interview process. For example, Booth is an alumni interview, very focused on behavioral questions. Tell us, for example, tell us a time when you did a leadership thing at work. What is your biggest, one time when you failed at work. So questions like those, which they want you to be introspective about. Harvard, even though I did not undergo the interview, is a very factual, rapid fire sort of interview, taken by a interviewer, adcom interviewer. So the different, and of course Wharton is a group discussion, so it works very independently. So need to prepare differently for each type of interview. But the few common threads are why MBA, why right now, why this particular school, and you need to have done proper research and not give very generic points where anyone can answer. And it needs to be very specific. So for me, of course, I over-indexed on the mobility and entrepreneurship for both of my interviews. I also did a lot of mocks for the group discussion for Wharton. And for Booth also, I did a lot of mock interviews. We did a couple ourselves. So I ended up doing a lot of mocks, taking feedback on my answers from alums. The same alums I had reached out to in round 1, the ones I had a more stronger rapport with, ended up sending my answers to them as well and running it by them. कि कोई major तो नहीं है. But the interview process also, the preparation took a bit of time. I think the entire October and the November month was in that preparation period. My interviews actually went pretty well. I think my Booth interview went extremely well. And Wharton was a little bit tough to judge because it's a group discussion. Overall, I had a good feeling when I came out of the group discussion.
All right. So yeah, so after so then within a couple of weeks you get to know whether you've got an admit or not. How does that work?
Even that, so everything. So the most excruciating part of the process, despite the fact that everything is like very long drawn, the most excruciating part is the wait. So there are two wait times. One is right after you put in the application, the wait for getting the interviews, and then the time after you give the interviews, your final outcome. So so my booth interview was, I think, on 7th of November, and the results were on, I think, 3rd or 4th of December. And my Wharton interview, I had couple of interviews because I was also a dual degree candidate.
Right.
So my Wharton interview was on 16th, and then I had another interview on 18th. So the results were out on 16th December. So there's that entire 1 month wait that one needs to go through. And even after the applications, there's the entire 20-25 day wait period. The only problem is that, like any individual, you end up double guessing, rereading your applications, and revisiting your interviews and thinking that this is what you could have done better. This is where you made a mistake. And regardless of whether it was a mistake or not, you'll reread your application and find every single error that is there and say that, this comma could have been there. So that's, I think, the slightly excruciating part of the wait. But I think it's a part and parcel of the whole thing. But typically there's a 3 to 4 week time period between your interviews and your result.
Right. And I think the worst thing is that, you've interviewed, but you're also thinking that maybe you should have a backup plan, and you start thinking about round 2 also, and that becomes even more painful.
Correct. So I only had 2 interviews, ma'am, but there were friends of mine who had like 6 interviews in round 1. And they got rejected from 4 out of 6 and got waitlisted at 2. So there are cases like those also where you undergo this entire 5 to 6 month process, and then you have like a couple of waitlists which are very difficult to know whether they'll convert or not, and then you have to start doing your round 2 process again. So and that's another 4 months. So that becomes an entire 10-month period of its own. So it's a big challenge, I think, to undergo this entire process. So that is why many times people recommend having a few safety net schools in the first round. I do not know if that's the right approach or not, but it does take a bit of pressure off from your head.
That's true. So how does it feel now that you are into one of the top schools in the world with a Wharton admit? What is the feeling that you had when you actually got it? I'm sure now it's sunk down now and sunk in well. But when you actually got it, what was your thought, and what went in your mind?
Yeah, ma'am. So I think, as I was describing the process, whenever I thought earlier that when I would get an admit to a business school or a master's school of my choice, the feeling would be that of joy, and I'd be overjoyed. But to be honest, the feeling was not of joy. The feeling was of relief. and the biggest relief was that I do not have to undergo this process ever again. Thankfully, don't have to undergo it in round 2. So I think that the relief was, I think, the biggest feeling, and it was perhaps the only feeling that was there in the beginning. Of course, I was overjoyed as well. I told my family and other people, and it was a little bit of a stretch school for me. So getting in was was, in my sense, a bit of an accomplishment for me, because I really thought that I might make it to perhaps an INSEAD or a Columbia because of my background. Wharton was a bit of a tough one. So, and I think thanks to Arun sir, you and others, and a lot of my friends who helped me out. So it really worked well. But the only thing was that I don't have to go through the entire process ever again.
I agree.
And it was, and it was a long time, because that I'd been planning to do an MBA. First, it was the IIMs, and within IIMs also, I was only looking at like IIM Calcutta as my college. But after a few attempts, finally got through like one college.
Yeah. So have you been to any of these campuses? Like, have you visited or, anything of that sort? Just
Ma'am,
the
actually,
huh.
no, I haven't visited any. Uh, I haven't visited any campus except for the Indian School of Business, which is where my brother graduated from. So that's one. That's the only MBA school that I have visited.
All right. All right. So then I'm even more excited for you because I'm sure how you'll, the feeling that you have when you actually enter that campus, to plan, and that, okay, the next 2 years you're going to spend there. So, that's going to be an amazing feeling for you too. I guess you spoke to a lot of these passionate Wharton alumni also, right? I think one of your interviewers, the mock interview that was done was from one of the Wharton alumni. So the passion they show, the love they show for the school, all comes on to you when they talk about it, right?
Yeah, ma'am. So I think you had connected me to Natasha, who was very, very helpful. In fact, her it was even more helpful because her background and her post MBA career was similar to what I want to do. So
Right.
she worked at, I think, JP Morgan in the investment side, and then worked at Microsoft post MBA. So that's a little bit similar to how I am looking at things. So it really helped me out. People are very passionate and I think helpful as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes, prospective candidates feel a bit shy in reaching out. I think that should be done away with.
Yeah.
And people are very, very happy to, encourage you to apply to their school and also, in a way, sell their school and be brand ambassadors for that.
True.
I think
True.
it was a good experience in that sense.
Right. Right. So, any final words of wisdom for people who are, are going to be in your shoes, how you were, a year or 2 years ago?
Yeah, ma'am. So, um, my words of wisdom would probably, it might be better if it comes from people like you or Arun sir, who've been doing it with multiple people. For me, it's more of my perspective. Um, I think the MBA application is a very nice introspective process, makes you think a lot about yourself. Um, Also gets frustrating at times because you see that certain things are maybe tailored just for the applications. So it might get a bit frustrating, and there are a lot of unfair things even during the process. So one needs to, you know, be resilient, and start maybe a little bit earlier, uh, and try to be, I think, more diligent with all their work during the process. It's a long process.
True.
Uh, it has a lot of different aspects, and I think one very, very important thing is that take all the help that you can get, because there are hundreds of things that one needs to do while simultaneously working on their other professional and personal
True.
undertakings.
True. True.
So start early, work hard, and be resilient because there would be a lot of failures.
Right. That's true. That's true. So I'm glad it turned all perfectly for you. I'm so happy for you and congratulations. Wish you all the best. So, what is your plan now in the next couple of months? Are you preparing for it, or are there some pre-course classes that you have to do? How do you go about it?
Yeah, ma'am. So I think another thing is that um, for any Indian, it's a lot of money that one needs to think about. So there's a lot of financial planning, and along with it, some seriousness that one needs to have. So for me, because I've been in India, and also have had relatively, comfortable jobs, life has been relatively easier. But now that you have to think about a little bit more, serious stuff, going to a new country, um, you need to think about a lot more than what you would if you were in India. So a lot more planning on what you really need to do, a lot more financial planning. I also intend to, be free for say 2 3 months, 2 months before my MBA, and then just enjoy.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's
because
very important, right?
yeah, because after this life might be a little bit more busy.
Yeah.
Uh, So I do intend to do that, spend more time with family, read more books. So I think that's the pre-MBA plan. I have been enjoying for the last 2-3 months as well. Since the day of the result, I've been fairly relaxed, to be honest. So a few things that I plan to do, a few trips that I plan to go for if COVID allows. Right now, my life is much better than what it was in September, October.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So, all right. Thank you so much, Shashank. This was so insightful. I really enjoyed talking to you. I got so much of information, and I know it took longer than what I assessed, but it was just so much fun talking to you. So, I got so much information out of this. So, thank you so much. Wish you all the best, and please let us know if you need any other help, around anything else. So, we're more than happy to help.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. I think you guys have been already very, very helpful. Maybe I'll just reach out for general advice.
Sure. Anytime. Yeah, anytime. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks a lot, man. Thank you so much. Thank you. And hope you get better. I hope the surgery thing is.
Yeah. Maybe next time I will have it in a more open setting with video.
Yeah. This is fine. I think this is great. That's perfectly fine.
All right, ma'am. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice Sunday. Bye.